And we're back to Freebird Media. My apologies for the brief technical difficulties we just had. Professor, thank you for sticking with me here. So you were elaborating for me on the conscious awareness that Muslims have, for example, towards what the West and our situation with a lack of masculinity. But you were also saying that they themselves are softening up as well, as evidenced by their declining birth rate. So, do you think that the West can absorb outsiders, and that is, rather than us being taken over by them, we'll feminize them to our level? Which is more likely, do you think?
Um, if they keep coming in the numbers that they're coming, it's just a matter of demographics. They will take over, regardless of whether they're emasculated or not. Just the sheer presence of non-whites. I mean, we know about Chinatowns. When you have lots of Chinese, they're going to create their own culture, their own habitat. And you can see that happening. I mean, Richmond, BC, that basically is a gigantic Chinatown at this point. And it's not about the Chinese being so masculine or anything like that. So just the sheer numbers, if whites are reduced to a minority,
I lost.
yeah,
Sorry, I lost you there briefly.
yeah.
Sorry, continue.
Right. So it's a matter of numbers, and we cannot count on that. And so even if they were to become like Westerners, it would be a completely different civilization because of the numbers. And we know that the left and the corporate, so-called conservative establishment, they are working very hard at diluting and breaking down Western identity. So that in itself doesn't bode well for European peoples.
Do you suspect that feminism, as we have it in the West, is also sort of a unique thing that to Europeans, or is feminism something that also just comes with comfortability and that sort of thing?
I wouldn't say it comes directly. Feminism is an added component that emerged uniquely in the West. But it is interesting that when you go back to Roman history, you do have at first a very patriarchal society in which women were not really allowed to come out on the public square that much. Whereas by the time that you get to the last century BC into the first century AD, the Romans, including the emperor, what is the first emperor there now? I forget his name. I'm forgetting names today, but the first emperor of the Roman Empire, he's fully aware of this. He says that people are not having children, Romans are not creating families. So this is a phenomenon that happened in the past. And it was not because of feminism, but at the same time, it was nothing like what we witness today. It isn't as if women were taking over the army, taking over the government, and that kind of thing as is happening in the West. So feminism is clearly an ideological factor that has to be taken seriously. But it would be a mistake to think that it's just a product of feminism and that men would just be the way they were a few decades ago if it was not because of feminism. I think men weaken when things get more easygoing. That's just the way it is.
Right. That makes sense. So, I'm just thinking now as you speak. You say that the West begins in Greece, and with Greece, in the ancient Greece at least, you have the Athenians and the Spartans, for example. And I know that the Spartan females, from based on what I've read, were that was a militaristic culture, right? So the females, and they
Yeah.
were communal, and they were about shame and bravery and things like that. So the women seem very tough, is what I'm getting at. They would
Yeah.
encourage their sons to go out. So it's not necessarily just a biological thing then with females, because some cultures have had very strong-minded females. You would agree then?
Yes, I mean, it's something that is interesting. Indo-Europeans that came from the so-called steppe lands, what is the Ukraine today, that whole area of flat lands and horse riding and so on, they were hyper-patriarchal. And yet, you already see in prehistoric documents and images that women were not slavish without an identity. They adorn themselves, they dress themselves in provocative ways. Men tended to like that because I think that, and you see this in various characters in Greek plays, whether it is Sophocles or even the Odyssey and Euripides, you see strong female characters. So my view is that because of the aristocratic culture of Indo-Europeans, in which men are elevated and they have a sense of their dignity, their identity, that has an effect all around them, including among the women. They see proud men with their own individuality, and then men look at their women and they begin to recognize that as well. So it has been unique among Europeans that they appreciated women, and they kind of like the fact that some women stand out and support them, and they're really tough and so on. Not like it is today, but I would say that this notion that if you have patriarchal men, it means subserviency for women and they're not allowed to express themselves. It's not quite true. Not among Europeans in any case. Not like in the Islamic world. So, I mean, you can see it in the United States if you go and watch movies from the 20s, 30s, 50s, in that so-called patriarchal society. The women characters stand out. They're very confident. In fact, they have better voices than women do today, more stronger, assertive voices. Women today don't have very strong, assertive voices. Many of them sound, even when they're adults, like the childish voice is still coming out of them. So it's not true. It's a very interesting, strange phenomenon. It hasn't been studied, but it is my view that an aristocratic culture, which is a celebration of strength, independence, autonomy, fearlessness, honor, dignity, that has an effect on women as well, and that men cannot see that in women, and they want to see that as well. But that doesn't mean it's feminism, not what it is today.
Right, I understand. All right, switching up questions for a moment. This is something that somebody else had sent me and asked me to ask you specifically. So, and as it relates to the West, and the question is, progressives often make the claim that at one point in history, Islamic civilization was actually ahead of the West in terms of science, astronomy, mathematics, and grammar. This is something I hear quite a lot. So people often, they say, Islam is an advanced civilization. They were actually ahead of us, and if it wasn't because of the Crusades or European aggression or whatever, they would still be in their golden age. So it's not fair to sort of think of them as less enlightened than the West. That's something that I hear a lot, and you probably heard too. So how is that true, and to what degree would Islamic civilization have been ahead of the West?
Well, you can argue that for a period of time, let us say from the 8th century AD through the 9th, 10th, the 11th, they were more advanced. You could say that when the Saudi Arabians expanded out of what is today Saudi Arabia and occupied what is today Iran and other areas of the Near East, they encountered far more advanced civilizations from which they learned a lot. They learned a lot from the Persians. And then they moved through North Africa, Egypt, and areas that have been colonized by the Romans for a long time, and into most of Spain. And so they move into areas that have been more advanced than they were in the Arabian Peninsula. And a lot of their achievements were made possible because of these civilizational areas that they occupied that are already high levels of learning. Now, there is no question that the Islamic peoples were drawn and attracted to some of the learning that they encountered in Persia and in the Western side. They admire Aristotle, they really admire him and wrote excellent commentaries about his works. So I would say in a very general way that the Islamic peoples in that period, let us call it the early Middle Ages, were more advanced than the West because they were occupying areas that were very advanced, whereas the core of what was now becoming the West, which is sort of France, Germany, England, that had always been kind of more on the margins of the Roman Empire, so they were less advanced. And Islamic peoples preserved and wrote about what the Greeks had written, and they themselves made some significant contributions in pharmaceuticals, medicine, in optics, and astronomy. Those are the key areas in which they made major contributions. There is a lot of debate. Some people say that Islamic progress and advance continue right through the 16th century. I don't think so, and that they were responsible for the Renaissance. That's just not true. Then some people say the 1400s. My view is by the 12th century, the Europeans had acquired whatever it is that they absorbed from the Islamic peoples, and then they forge ahead. The Europeans during the early Middle Ages, when the Roman Empire collapsed in the 6th century into the 7th, 8th, 9th century, was a period of chaos and breakdown. And so, yes, it wasn't really an advanced period in European history, but things were accomplished during that time. One of the things I argue in uniqueness is that in many ways it was a good thing. The Romans were decadent. The people that had declined, they had nothing to offer to the world. They were completely corrupt. So these energetic, useful, vibrant barbarians came in and took over, and they re-energized the West. So I admire them for that. And then quite a few things were preserved, and Christianity played a big role in this, in the monasteries. Many of the writings of the Romans and the Greeks were preserved and rewritten. By the 11th century, into the 11th century, they're taking off. And then through the 12th, the 13th century, the Europeans are moving in their own direction. They're improving on technologies that are coming from the rest of the world, like the heavy cloud. They're improving on windmills. And then they're also inventing new things that were never seen before, like spectacles, eyeglasses that double the life of craft workers. They soon invent mechanical clocks. This is into the 1300s, and then the printing press. So they're moving in their own direction in a very fast-paced way. And there are many other things that medieval people do. For one, or for another, actually, they also create universities all across Europe, which were unique as autonomous bodies of learning that are not controlled by feudal lords or kings. They have their own legal autonomy to decide what to teach, how to teach it, and how to decide when somebody is a master in a particular learning. The madrasas of the Islamic world were not like that at all. They were more religiously oriented. You didn't really, properly speaking, have faculties in the sense that this faculty is dedicated to this type of learning as a form of learning in logic, in grammar, in theology and philosophy that is very important. They would intermingle all things with religion and Islam and the Quran. They didn't confer degrees by people that have the qualifications to confer them, at least in the sense that they have written documents that prove that they have those qualifications. And so you do see in Europe in the Middle Ages that they are, in my view, by the 12th century, really moving past the Islamic peoples. But that is not taught anymore. Nothing is taught anymore. There are many excellent books by excellent scholars who say this. There are many excellent scholars, and I cite quite a few of them in my book Uniqueness, who say that Europeans in the Middle Ages are moving ahead of everyone in many respects. They're not the most populated people, so they don't have the largest cities, and they don't produce, in terms of total output, the most goods. But in terms of standard of living, they argue the Europeans had a higher standard of living than the Chinese already by the 1100s and the 1200s. Then you get the Black Death, and so there's a drop there. But yeah, I think that's my answer. The Islamic peoples, yes, they had their golden age, but past the 12th century, I don't see that many noble developments. Just because you still find in the Islamic world a thinker here and a thinker there and so on, that doesn't mean they're ahead. That's what the Islamic scholars do. They say, oh, look at this thinker. He's kind of teaching at university, or Europeans are reading him and so on, so we are just as advanced. That's not true. There are many, many medieval thinkers that I write about. I have an article recently, a few months ago, in which I come to the conclusion that almost all the great philosophers are European.
Right. A few notable exceptions in philosophy would probably come from India and China, if anywhere else.
Actually, in the list, I have a list of the first I have a list of the 75 greatest philosophers. Then I expanded it into 100, if I remember. And there is not a single person from India. It's not that they didn't have. 100 is not that much. Right. You have to understand that Europe is producing one great thinker after another. Aquinas, St. Anselm, Bonaventure, Scotus. These are all medieval thinkers, and they're all very great. And I consulted a lot of histories of philosophies from various sources and publications, and that was sort of the consensus. Nowadays, if you look at some popular publications that have come out recently, they are all kinds of people from all over the world. But when you read what they're saying, and I read quite a few Chinese philosophers, the people that challenge the Europeans in terms of philosophy the most are the Chinese. But by comparison, they produce very few. And I would say that the pre-Socratics, quite a few of them are already at a higher level than all the Chinese philosophers, like Heraclitus, Parmenides, Anaxagoras, and others. Are kind of thinking in an analytical way, really explaining why they believe this to be the case rather than something someone else said. Whereas in the case of the Chinese, they're making a lot of proclamations. They're not really justifying why it is that this particular claim is more truthful than another claim. They kind of write in a very aphoristic way, short sentences, short statements, and there are some profound statements there. I like some of what the Taoists say, but I guess maybe I'm Eurocentric, but I like it when people go about trying to explain why you should believe this rather than that. And I see that among the medieval philosophers continuously.
So that's a very interesting answer. This will be my final question because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but all of this has made me think. So I don't have for myself necessarily a political label that I like, but I do think that the West is in danger of of ethnocide or going extinct, and I would like to see a reinvigoration of that energy in the West that we saw maybe in the Middle Ages that you're referencing. So I'm wondering what could possibly be the best course of action to take to try to reinvigorate a Western spirit, besides perhaps you've suggested maybe like white Europeans should be allowed to reaffirm their sense of ethnic identity, as all people should. I would agree with you there. Are there any other steps that those of us who are opposed to cultural Marxism might consider for trying to reinvigorate a Western energy?
Well, if you're a person that believes in these ideas, then you have to be a representative of those ideas in the way you conduct yourself. There are many things that young men, young women can do, and I know quite a few of them. You get educated in these ideas. You like what you're doing. You promote these ideas, and getting married and having children is a good thing. For our side, I don't think that some people, they say I'll be single and dedicate myself to these things, and I understand that. But many others, I think they should seriously consider that it is important for them to in many ways follow a normal career. You have to be careful. Don't take unnecessary risks. Know how to play the political game. The left wants to destroy you, and you don't want to give them that benefit. They would enjoy that. I mean, I see them coming after me, and I know they want to destroy me, and I find ways to try and not let them do that. So you got to do that and understand the West and try and live up to its ideals and keep the torch during this very difficult period alive. In my case, I just don't see what else to do. I'm always driven by the need to say that the West is really, really different in ways that people still haven't yet fully understood. That's what I dedicate myself to. I'm currently writing a fourth book, and it's going to be back to the West and what makes it so different. And I want to convey to people that diversification is really a destruction of something that is too precious to let go. Other peoples are not going to care about the West. They just will not. Mainstream conservatives, they think, oh, we'll assimilate them and they'll embrace the West. They'll embrace a West that speaks or claims to speak for everyone and is multicultural and diversified. But they don't care about the West as a creation of Europeans. Why should they? You shouldn't expect them to. And so it is your burden. It is your duty to be in charge of that. That's what I mean when I say that we should be pride. We should have pride in our heritage. Not that you say that's yours and you can sit back. It just means that that's what your ancestors gave you, and now you're obligated to cherish it and to speak well of it and to promote it in whatever ways you can. So that's what I mean by it. And without that sense of pride, it's very difficult to want to do that. That's what I would say.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and I agree with you, and I appreciate you taking all this time to talk with me. Just like to remind my viewers that you have three excellent books that I've read so far that I recommend everyone check out. The Uniqueness of Western Civilization, which is excellent, Faustian Man in a Multicultural Age, and Canada in Decay, which is probably the most relevant and the most important that I would recommend for people to start with. And on that note, I'd also like to say thanks for talking with me. Thanks for sticking with me through these technical issues. But since the first time I spoke to you, we've doubled in size, and I hope that I can speak to you again, and we're still growing the next time I speak to you. And
Oh, yes, for sure. So, bye to your listeners.
and thank you, and I hope to speak to you again. Take care, Professor.
Okay, bye then.